This is Senator Dick Black, Focus on the News, and we are at Monday, June the 10th. Interesting article came up, and I just wanted to discuss this. Our topic, our lead topic is coward Mitch McConnell says that we need to show what we're willing to fight for. I just thought I would take a few minutes and discuss the hypocrisy of people, some of these war hawks like Senator Mitch McConnell, who has poured money into Ukraine and caused vast suffering and death over there. Mitch McConnell was over for the anniversary of D-Day, and he said, we cannot repeat the mistakes of the 1930s. Now, presumably, it was a mistake in the 1930s for us to attempt to avoid getting entangled in this tremendous war in Europe. And so Mitch McConnell, our rotund Senate Majority Leader, took the opportunity, the anniversary of D-Day, to pen a very lengthy article chastising those who urge peace. And he declared, this is important, the way to prove America means what it says is to show what we're willing to fight for. All right, so here we have the powerful war hawk, the courageous Mr. Mitch McConnell, demanding that my kids and my grandchildren get sent out onto the battlefield to get slaughtered. Well, Mitch McConnell had an opportunity to show what he was made of back in 1967. So I want to give you a comparison of two people, someone who is opposed to these senseless wars overseas, which is me, the chicken hawk, whatever they want to call it, the peacenik, I suppose, versus Mitch McConnell, our courageous, heroic Senate Majority Leader. Let's see what both of us did in 1967. Okay, so in 1967, there was a bloody, high-intensity war underway in Vietnam. Mitch McConnell and I were both young men, and we were both subject to the draft. So first, let's look at me. Okay, I'm the peacenik, I suppose, today, who does not want to go into a war against Ukraine on the other side of the globe. So in 1967, when duty called, I volunteered to join the Marines. I then volunteered to go into flight training, became a Marine pilot, second lieutenant, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I was one of two pilots who were the first people from the 2nd Marine Air Wing on the East Coast to go over and join the Marine pilots who were already flying helicopters there. So in '67, I was flying helicopters through heavy anti-aircraft fire to deliver Marines into the assault and to recover dying Marines from the battlefield and bring them back and try to get them to medical care. At the same time, the other fellow who was among the first two volunteers, a fellow named Mike Carley, he was a graduate of Brown University, great guy, good humor, lots of courage. About 10 miles away from me, he was attempting to fly in underneath enemy heavy ground fire, and his strategy was a good idea. It didn't work, but he was trying to fly beneath their anti-aircraft fire. He flew in, taking a troop of Marines into battle. He was shot through the canopy in the face, died instantly, doing the same thing as I did. In 1967, I also volunteered to join very heavy ground battles around Da Nang, Vietnam. The North Vietnamese were attempting to infiltrate Da Nang, which was the second largest city in Vietnam. And there was tremendous bloodshed underway in the effort to stop them. I fought with 7 different Marine infantry companies before finally being wounded. Both of my radiomen were killed right beside me while we were rescuing Marines at an outpost that was surrounded and under attack. All right, so let's take a look. Now that's what I did. Someone who is advocating for peace, somebody that Mitch McConnell has great contempt for. So let's see what heroic deeds our Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was undertaking at that same time. Well, Senator McConnell was, he went to college, he went on to law school. During that time, he repeatedly dodged the draft using educational deferments. When the deferments finally ran out, he pulled off quite an interesting little trick. He enlisted, but he enlisted in the Army, but he did it for one of the coveted reserve unit slots in a unit that would never be deployed. So he ensured and took care to make sure that he would never, under any circumstances, be exposed to combat where he might be injured. Well, 37 days after his enlistment in the military, following a powerful Kentucky U.S. Senator's intervention and repeated calls on his behalf, he was discharged on a fishy medical excuse, which, you know, a lot of this was going on back in those days. You had wealthy, influential people who would dodge the draft. They'd get out on medical deferments, educational deferments, and sometimes they had strong political figures who would intervene to make sure that the military did the right thing for them. So Mitch McConnell was an evader and a coward, but he is keen to send other people to die, even though when his nation called, he shirked his duty and he hid, leaving others to die so that he could become rich and powerful. How rich did he become? I don't know exactly what his net worth is today, but a well-known website referred to as Open Secrets disclosed that in 2018, his net worth was $34,137,534. This man had $37 million earned almost entirely through government service. I don't know why the government pays so much for these fellows. Well, it doesn't pay them, but they have their ways of making sure they get plenty of money. So he epitomizes the globalist elites who demand that the commoners sacrifice while they go out and they party on yachts and they wheel and deal and this sort of thing. The man's a hypocrite, and he's a hypocrite like most of his ilk who cry out for war while they line their pockets and send brave men to their death. It's a disgusting feature of the American political system today. I don't know what can be done about it, but it really demonstrates the moral corruption and depravity of the elite. Okay, let's shift to something else. And this is another little bit of deceit on the part of the war hawks. George Clooney, it just came up. George Clooney was somehow criticizing Russia, and he was demanding something or other that's not to the point. But in the course of this, the press secretary for the Russians, a very astute woman, Zakharova. She said, we understand both Clooney and his organization very well. She was responding to some insult that he had made. And she said, she says, therefore, we would like to invite them to engage in real assistance to journalists and obtain a list of the townspeople who died in Bucha. Now, you may recall that almost immediately after the United States and Great Britain demanded that Zelensky stop negotiating for peace and get back to fighting this war, as a cover for abandoning the peace talks, which were almost completed, almost satisfactory to both sides. We intervened, we stopped the peace talks, and in order to cover that up, suddenly there was this apparent slaughter of people in Bucha. And there were videos that depicted people laying dead on the sides of the road. Now, Bucha was a place that was close to Kiev, close to the capital. I think they call it Kyiv now, using the Ukrainian rather than the Russian term for it. But Bucha was close, and it was involved in the area of heavy combat where the Ukrainians managed to stop the Russians from moving into the capital. It was a victory for the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians finally forced the Russians to withdraw. And so they had been in Bucha for a considerable time. I don't know whether they were there for a month or what, but it was a long time. And as they left, then the mayor of Bucha came in and he said, you know, we've sort of recaptured our city and everything is going to be fine. There was no mention made of anybody that was killed. So the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian intelligence services moved into Bucha, and it wasn't until 4 days later that suddenly they began to discover bodies on the main streets. I don't know why they didn't just happen to notice them while they were driving there, but the chances are they didn't notice them because they were not there. So I looked at those videos, and you know, I had a career in criminal prosecution. I was the chief of the criminal law division for the Army at the Pentagon before I retired. And so you always look at things and you scrutinize the evidence. And what I saw was, as the videos were taken, the vehicles would be driven through the streets of Bucha, and you would see these bodies, but there wasn't some cluster of bodies that had all been machine gunned or something. What it was is you'd have a body here. You'd go 100 yards, there'd be a body on the left. You go 100 yards, there'd be another body just laying there right next to the edge of the road. A very unnatural way for people to die, to happen to all be just sort of carefully placed right at the roadside. It struck me as a very odd and kind of implausible crime scene. Now, the Russians had occupied Bucha for quite a long time, and suddenly there were bodies when they left, not before. Now, had they wanted to execute people for whatever reason, they could have gathered them together. They could have taken them secretly out into the woods. They could have excavated someplace, murdered people, put them away, and then covered it up, and no one would have been the wiser. But instead, these bodies appear 4 days after the Russians have left. Now, there were other interesting things about it. And one of the things is that back at the time, civilians who wanted to stay out of the line of fire would wear one of two types of armbands. And if they were pro-Ukrainian, they would wear a blue or yellow armband. If they were just simply neutral and they weren't taking sides, they'd wear a white armband. And the armbands that were shown in the video were all the neutral people, or rather, yes, they were the neutral people. In other words, the wrong group of people seem to be getting killed. The ones who might very well be pro-Russian rather than just pro-Ukrainian. So the whole thing seemed to be quite a put-up deal, coming just as we had forced Zelensky to abandon the peace talks. Well, so this is an interesting proposal. Zakharova has said, why don't you, we invite you to give real assistance to journalists and obtain a list of the townspeople who died in Bucha. Now, there were tremendous investigations, supposedly, of what happened. Now, the Ukrainians were in control. They had total dominance over the area. The people, the bodies were there. They weren't hidden. They weren't damaged. What happened to the identity of these supposed victims in Bucha? And so Zakharova goes on. She says, this is quote, "Imagine, George Clooney, to this day, no one knows who exactly the Western media, including CNN and BBC, showed lying on the streets of Bucha. Publish the list of their names and save Western journalists from historical dishonor." Well, the fact is that the entire Bucha massacre was a false flag. Those things are done often. The British are particularly adept at these things. And in any event, it just shows the hypocrisy. Obviously, if you wanted to prove that these were victims living there in Bucha, then publish the names. That's easy to do. The people are right there. Their neighbors can come and say, yes, that's Dick Black lying there on the sidewalk. Okay, well, let's take his name down. Why did that never happen? It didn't happen because it was a false flag. It was a staged event, and this type of thing goes on all the time. Okay, let's shift to something else. We were discussing at the last meeting that we had the pushback among the global South nations against Western imposed homosexuality. Now, here's another one that I thought I would just add because it's very interesting. This is out of RT News, and it's entitled "Iraq Bans Homosexuality." And the importance of this is that the United States invaded Iraq on a false pretext of weapons of mass destruction that never existed. And so now the people who went in, the men who fought with great honor, the Americans and the others, they believed that what they were doing was right, that it was virtuous and so forth. I don't think they understood what was going on in the background. And here's one of the things that was going on. When the United States occupied Iraq, we immediately banned, or we basically abolished the Iraqi laws that prohibited homosexual conduct. So this was one of the outcomes. Another outcome of our invasion of Iraq is that Iraq had one of the oldest and largest Christian communities in the Middle East. It had survived waves of Islamic fundamentalist terror and so forth. It's very large, significant part of the Iraqi population. And when the United States went in, we simply annihilated. It just sort of disappeared under the tremendous attacks by U.S. forces. Now, I don't believe that there were any Americans among the line troops on the ground who realized that part of the mission of the forces in Iraq was to exterminate Christian population. This is the same thing that we're doing in Syria, and the same thing that we did in Kosovo. We're part of Serbia, where we allowed the radical Islamic terrorists to move into Kosovo, purge it, behead all of the remaining Christians there. So there's an undercurrent within the war on terror of a war on Christianity, and it continues to this day. It was started by Barack Hussein Obama, although to some extent it was started by George Bush, because back in 2003, we had our heroic George Bush, who also dodged the draft, by the way. He got himself a slot in the reserves, and he got pictures taken. Sometimes he was actually a pilot, and he got pictures taken from time to time on the base. But that's about all that he did. And he never served in combat, and he selected that unit with the full knowledge that he would never be subject to any combat. So anyway, so in Iraq, again, we abolished the restrictions on homosexual behavior, and the Iraqi parliament has just amended the law, and it's called the Law on Combating Prostitution and Homosexuality. Passed the legislature on Saturday, and it mandates prison sentences of up to 10 to 15 years for people who engage in sodomy, and 7 years for those who promote sodomy or prostitution. It has penalties for people who change their biological gender, or who cross-dressers, the man who dresses a woman and vice versa. The Iraqi parliamentary speaker, Mohsen Mandalawi, said in a statement that passing this law was a necessary step to protect the value structure of society and to protect our children from calls for moral depravity and homosexuality. Now, the United States came back and it said the United States is deeply concerned by Saturday's vote. And obviously, we stand on the side of moral depravity and homosexuality. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said that the amendment threatens those most at risk in Iraqi society, weakens their ability to diversify their economy. In other words, we're saying, okay, we're gonna cut your business deals if you don't go along with homosexuality. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron called the law dangerous and worrying, and he said, no one should be targeted for who they are. Well, there's not a thing in the Iraqi law that targets anyone for who they are. It targets them for what they do and the damage that they do to Iraqi culture. Homosexuality has always been taboo among Iraq's Shia majority, and they consider LGBT culture as a hostile Western ideology, not merely a sort of a deviant sexual practice, but a part of Western ideology. So we see this constant pushback, and here we are after we had, thousands and thousands of very fine American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines fighting in Iraq. And little did they know that among the things they were fighting for was the advancement of sodomy, child abuse, pedophilia, gender surgery, sexual mutilation, all of these very depraved things. So that is a continuation of what we're seeing, this movement across the global South, and certainly led by Russia to some extent, to crack down on sexual degeneracy. And we in the West are on the other side of the coin. I hope that at some point we'll wake up and perhaps look at what's going on with the rest of the world and say, this is pretty depraved what we're doing. We're teaching our school children to give in to homosexual grooming and even to undergo sexual mutilation surgery. So there's progress being made in the world, and perhaps it'll come to our shores before too long. In any event, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. And this has been Senator Dick Black. We will see you next Monday.